Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz, along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert Tom Colohue. And today may just be the greatest wrestling podcast ever. What do you say, Tom?
I'm disappointed in how short a pause there was between you saying that and you saying ever. When I hear that on Raw, it just seems like it takes forever and there's such an awkward, dead silence before they say ever. I gotta say, yours was a lot better than theirs.
I figured if I made our listeners feel the way that I do when I watch Raw, I don't want our listeners to turn our podcast off, which is kind of how I feel like when I'm watching Raw when they take that long, pregnant pause that I just feel like, oh gosh, like really, this is really how we're hyping this matchup. I mean,
okay, the branding there is a bit awkward, and I say it's a bit awkward. It's not good, the branding they've done for that, but I thought Raw overall was pretty good this week, to be honest with you.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, outside, I said I'm just talking just with this Orton Edge match at Backlash, which is where we're going to start with today's show. So we'll just get right into it. We got the official announcement last week that it would be Edge versus Orton in just your run-of-the-mill wrestling match, this time at Backlash. We did talk a little bit about it last week, but this week on Raw, they really started doubling down on this greatest wrestling match ever tagline. They're using it in the promo art for the match on WWE.com. They're obviously using it in their promos on Raw. What exactly is the WWE setting us up for?
It's confusing because this has gone the complete opposite direction of your normal feud. It started with a last man standing match. It's now getting to the standard wrestling. And I'm guessing next has got to be the point where, they spill coffee on each other or something that starts it off. It's very different. I mean, we had email press releases sent to us which asked the question, is this going to be the greatest wrestling match ever? And we're the wrestling journalists, so we're obviously going to say no. It's a different way of doing it. But, will it pay off? No.
Yeah, I mean, that was my natural question is this not just the WWE setting these guys up for failure? I mean, when there's no way they're going to be able to live up to expectations, I think most people are like us. They're confused even by the offering of WWE that this is going to be the greatest wrestling match ever. It totally comes out of nowhere and again, just makes no sense whatsoever to me, but there's no way these guys are going to be able to meet those expectations when that is the tagline that is being put on them by the company before the match even takes place.
I completely agree, especially with no crowds in the arena, so they've not got that energy to feed off. Don't get me wrong, some of the builds have been very good, but it's so difficult to deliver when they tell people it's going to be the best match of all time. Because there are already people who've now decided it's not going to be the best match of all time. And to be honest, with the amount that they're up against, you're really setting them up to fail. It's like there's a lot of people right now who want to see a Styles Undertaker rematch, whereas I personally don't, because I don't feel you can outdo the Boneyard match. Admittedly, with the reduced cast they've got backstage and no shake-up like was planned, they're having to drag the feuds out now, so this is just keeping going. This is obviously the way they've chosen to do it. But they do have one thing in their favour, and that's that the last man standing match wasn't that well received.
Yeah, we talked on last week's show that we were both a little bit surprised to see these two continuing their feud. The last man standing match really felt like a finality to their feud, which was very well built up, I thought, going into WrestleMania. So it did seem a little odd that now they're continuing this feud, and now we're getting this greatest wrestling match promo tagline. Is this a case of maybe Edge still getting his feet wet coming back from injury, and so Randy Orton is a guy that he trusts, and so if he's going to continue to have matches maybe at a little bit of a faster rate than he initially thought, that he wants to continue being in the ring with a guy he knows like Orton as opposed to, going into a feud with someone else?
It definitely feels that way. I mean, it could just be they're trying to drag it out longer than need be, but feuds like this are really good for someone who's just come back from injury, and the two have got so much history, it's not difficult to make people care about it. Both of them are delivering huge during promo segments. You look at Edge and just delivering sometimes straight at the camera, sometimes straight at Orton, and it feels intense and it feels passionate. But at the same time, Edge doesn't have that many matches per year on his contract, so I'm quite surprised at giving the same opponent twice. I don't feel they're really taking advantage of it because we're coming up to 3 matches in, and for every one of them, it's been all about Randy Orton.
This is the last thing I want to say on this greatest wrestling match ever thing. Is this a rib? Like, are we getting the wool pulled over our eyes? Is this something that somebody in the back thought would be funny? I mean, I can't imagine that Edge and Orton went to the creative team, and maybe I'm wrong, but I can't imagine that those two guys, especially considering Edge's situation just coming back from injury, went to the creative team and said, hey, we've got an idea. We're going to have a match at Backlash, and we're going to tell people that it's going to be the greatest wrestling match they've ever seen, and then we're going to go out there and deliver, and that's going to be the hype for our next match. I can't imagine that scenario happening. So, again, help me make sense about why they decided to go in this decision. I said, I've got to think that somebody in the back just thinks this is hilarious.
Edge and Orton had nothing to do with the branding here. Edge wanted the grit branding from the previous match, which is why it's on his t-shirt now, but they had nothing to do with this. They knew that it was going to be said in the ring, otherwise I think they would have creased up just as much as so many other people did. But it's one of those. Somebody definitely thinks it's a good idea. They have previews for this. I remember them hyping up the first Women's Money in the Bank and then having a man win it. And I just thought, surely that's a joke. They had to know people are going to laugh at the tag of greatest wrestling match ever. They had to. I mean, they had to, right? Surely they had to. They had to know people were just going to laugh at this.
I don't know. I guess that remains to be seen. I would definitely be interested to see what they're going to offer us at Backlash, because I feel like they've dug a hole maybe they can't get out of. And I hated that it's Edge and Orton, because these are two of my favorite wrestlers, not only right now, but maybe of all time, probably definitely in my top 10 or 15 of all time guys. And so I hate that it's also happening to them if this doesn't come off the way that WWE is intending it to. But maybe they'll surprise us. I don't know. Let's move on to another match we saw made official for Backlash this past Monday, which was Drew McIntyre defending his championship against Bobby Lashley. Lashley's definitely been a guy that's being rebuilt on the Raw brand over the past couple weeks, and so now he gets his WWE Championship match here at Backlash. We talked on the show previously numerous times, really, about the fact that Lashley really wanted a match with Brock Lesnar. Obviously, Lesnar's now dropped the title. He's out of the picture for the foreseeable future. Is this main event match with McIntyre somewhat of a consolation prize for him, since he wasn't able to get to that match with Lesnar that he wanted?
The match with Lesnar is definitely still coming. Lashley has been very open anytime he's asked anything. He returned to the WWE because he wants to take on Brock Lesnar. And the fact is that this was something that he took into contract negotiations with the WWE when he made his return. He wanted that to be respected. It's definitely still coming. At the same time, he can do more for other people right now. There's a definite intention to market Drew McIntyre as a fighting champion, but there's not that many opponents. There's not that many people available because of injuries or because of time away. So Drew McIntyre needs people. He can't keep beating Andrade every single week. This is part of Lashley's rebuild. It's been going really well to the point where he feels like he belongs in this sort of main event match. But I do feel there's a bit more work to do, and I don't see him coming out as a winner.
Have you liked this team up that they've done recently with him and MVP?
Oh, very much. Yeah, I had a bit of a conversation with MVP about this because originally I didn't see what was happening when Lashley first came out at the pay-per-view and attacked R-Truth. I didn't see the connection that was coming. And he encouraged me to have patience, and he was absolutely right. It's added a lot of interest, and it's made Lashley seem a lot more dangerous. I had a feeling of danger when they came out to the ring in the main event on Raw, and that's something that hasn't been there for a while. At the same time, you've still got Lana in the background, which means Lashley's got an easy way out should he lose the match, because the story with Lana isn't over yet. Plus, more importantly, this means we could still get Lana versus MVP in the dream match we all need.
I mean, obviously, that's the match that MVP came back for, right? I mean, he was just sitting on his
Oh,
couch
absolutely.
and, living the life, and WWE caught up and said, hey, what if we got you a match with Lana? And he was like, hey, sign me up. I'm there.
Yeah, when he came back to the Rumble, he was so upset that it wasn't the women's one.
Let's switch gears over now to the other side of the coin, which is Drew McIntyre. He's being set up, at least to me, as more of a fighting champion. He's got a new opponent. This is his second title defense. It's a new opponent. He had Seth Rollins first. Now he's got Bobby Lashley. We've talked on the show that we think Jinder Mahal is probably going to get a shot somewhere down the line as well. Do you prefer this build of a champion where he is given multiple opponents and is just kind of given that fighting champion moniker, as opposed to multiple rematches with the same guy?
I do personally, but it sort of has a diminishing return. You're seeing it with Bayley. She's worked with almost everyone on the SmackDown women's roster right now, and it's started to make it, you get that first match with someone who really starts to look really strong in the match and she puts her over. And Drew McIntyre is doing that exact same thing, but the more people he beats, the less effective it is at putting them over in defeat. So as well, when you push someone too strong, fans start to turn on them. It's going to be less pronounced with less of a crowd, but it's a Roman Reigns effect. It's good to see McIntyre taking a lot of people into main event spots temporarily, but you look at Baron Corbin being brought over, and that's because they're already low on opponents, and it's only May. So we need Lashley. We need Jinder Mahal. We potentially need more of a feud of MVP. We could see Drew McIntyre starting to run out of opponents, but hopefully at that point he will lose the championship, keeping him in the public eye, but in the chase, or maybe, and I'm really hopeful on this, we're still going to get McIntyre versus Undertaker at SummerSlam. Maybe.
Do you agree with me that the WWE maybe made a mistake by giving him Seth Rollins first in his first title defense? I feel like if they were going to go this direction with McIntyre, maybe they could have went with Lashley and maybe a Baron Corbin or whatever first, and then got him up to Seth Rollins, and that would be a guy that I don't think fans would probably have minded seeing him have maybe a series of matches with on pay-per-view. I feel like they kind of missed an opportunity there by giving him the Rollins match first, and then it's going to be all downhill from there. Like, no one's really going to be able to match that heel status of Rollins with the guys that he's going to be given, in the meantime.
Personally, I don't, because I feel a victory over Seth Rollins that early is a bit of a coup, and it really helps to show that McIntyre is there to stay and means business. When you consider the names he's beaten, if he was still wrestling Andrade for all the good that Andrade's had for his career recently, Angel Garza, Austin Theory, Buddy Murphy, they're not the top level talents that really give that endorsement. Seth Rollins really endorsed Drew McIntyre in the same way that Brock Lesnar did. Things like that are a big deal, even just in the locker rooms, but also in front of the fans. And I think in addition to that, Seth Rollins taking a loss immediately after taking a loss and then starting his rebuild is a good thing for him as well. You don't want to take the legs out from under him when he's starting to gain momentum. But when he's not got that much momentum, that's a good time to do it. So I feel, especially with what's happened with Rollins since, that was a great time for having him lose against Drew McIntyre.
Well, speaking of Seth Rollins, we saw his new stable apparently grow by another new member on Monday, and here he is again, the guy that I've constantly referred to on the show as probably the luckiest man in the WWE, at least the guy that has the best timing in the WWE, Austin Theory. He goes from a guy who was in NXT, right place, right time, gets called up, ends up in the faction with Zelina Vega along with Andrade and Garza, and now it looks like he's going to be switching over from the Vega faction over to the newest disciple for Seth Rollins.
When Edge was the ultimate opportunist, even he didn't have as many lucky opportunities as Austin Theory has had. And I don't want to play this down. Austin Theory is a very talented man, and he's earning things every time he gets the chance. But there's still a bit of luck involved. I'm a big fan of Team Vega, but what an upgrade to move from that, where he is essentially the lowest common denominator and he's there losing matches very often, to then shifting into Seth Rollins' faction, which is the top faction pretty much in the WWE right now. It's a very powerful place to be with someone who has incredible experience and can guide you just right. Now, most wrestling fans and people who are listening to the podcast will be aware of reports that Theory was going to be bounced straight back to NXT. That clearly was not the plan. We've called Theory lucky before, but right now he's taken every opportunity, and people backstage love this guy. They are desperate to see him succeed. Otherwise, he wouldn't have even come up from NXT in the first place. It's not just Zelina Vega singing his praises. You got Triple H and you got Paul Heyman expecting great things. And when you pair him with Seth Rollins, I think I do as well.
Would Theory be a guy that was quote-unquote handpicked for the group by Rollins himself? You know, we've seen guys in the past that have a certain stature in the company that when they're put in a stable, they have really carte blanche to kind of pick the guys that they think fit what they're trying to project. You know, Triple H with Evolution, you know, handpicking Orton and Batista. CM Punk, when he had the Straight Edge Society, had a lot of influence over the members of that group. Does Rollins have that same type of stature now where he's getting to dictate to the creative team, hey, here's some guys that I think would work well in this group, and here's some guys that I think, you know, fit what I'm envisioning for this, you know, Monday Night Messiah stable that he's got going?
Since Paul Heyman and Bruce Pritchard came in, there has been a clear effort to ensure the creative team is listening to the wrestlers more. Daniel Bryan has had a lot more say over what he does. Seth Rollins has had a lot more say over what he does, other than that he was told he'd be working with Drew McIntyre because they needed him there. But with Seth, a lot of what he's doing now is under his own direction. That dates back to Hell in a Cell. He made the choice to steer into the fan impression and turn heel. He made the choice to have that sermon where he preached to everyone after Survivor Series because he was taking the piss out of someone who was telling him that he had a big rah-rah speech that he apparently did not have. And since then, the creative team have been very openly listening. The initial pairing of the Authors of Pain was suggested to him, but since then he's been steering his own path. He's been going under his own direction. He chose Murphy. He's been very open about the fact that he's been very impressed with Murphy. And I'm sure we'll hear over the next few weeks how impressed he is with Austin Theory and how much he wanted to work with him. Seth is out there looking for people that fit what he is trying to do. And I don't think anyone is going to be turning him down anytime soon.
Like I said, Rollins' group has been compared a lot to the Straight Edge Society, like I mentioned. Punk's group had, you know, a female presence in it as well with Selena. Is there any likelihood that maybe a female competitor would be added to Seth Rollins' group somewhere down the line?
It's not impossible, but you have to ask certain questions. For example, a woman traveling alone or a big group of guys is uncommon. So there'll be questions about comfort level there. The question does come up a lot. Ruby Riot's definitely the fan favorite for the spot, but I don't feel the education that Seth Rollins will be offering to Murphy and to Theory is necessary given the level of experience that Ruby Riot has. And also I think that's just too close to being the Straight Edge Society because there are obvious similarities between Riot and Selena there. I'd steer clear personally for now, but I think there are some good options, mostly on SmackDown rather than Raw.
Speaking of the women's division over on SmackDown, one name that's been absent for a while now is Ember Moon, who suffered a ACL injury and has been out for a long while now, probably longer than a lot of people expected her to be. And she actually went on social media just this week and led a lot of people to believe that this injury that she has could possibly be a career ender. She's not 100% certain that she will actually be back in the ring as she continues to rehab from this injury. Is there any updates that you can give us on that? Is there any possibility that this is a kayfabe storyline with her talking about I may not be able to make it back, or is this a legit concern that, you know, her days as an in-ring competitor could possibly be over?
This is a legitimate concern. Although we've seen a lot of people return from potential career-ending injuries recently, it is still up to the wrestler what happens there. this could be a career ender. She wouldn't have said it if it wasn't. And we've seen some of that in her efforts to expand her range with the time that she's been spending with Up, Down, Down and the like, and time on WWE Backstage to get experience elsewhere for what may be a future without wrestling. Myself, I'm sure yourself and everyone at Sportskeeda really does wish her all the best, and we do hope to see her back in a wrestling ring sooner rather than later, if at all possible.
Absolutely, definitely agree with that. I think she was someone that had a lot of talent and had a lot of hype when she got called up to the main roster. And hopefully all the best to her on her recovery. Hopefully we'll see her back in the ring at some point. Speaking from one person in Ember Moon who may not return to the ring to one who did this past Monday was Kevin Owens. He makes his return to Raw, his first on-screen appearance since WrestleMania and his match with Seth Rollins. Does he now effectively take that number 2 babyface role on Raw behind Drew McIntyre?
Full-time of all the guys, Edge and Undertaker are probably bigger names when it comes to baby faces, but they don't count because of their part-time status. Right now, Raw's struggling for the top good guys, especially when they've lost Finn Balor after SummerSlam. Rusev just released. They were trying to push him in that direction. So the WWE were desperate to get Owens back. They wanted to keep that momentum going after Mania that unfortunately has now been lost. And that's one of the reasons his wrestling time was limited, because he's not 100% yet. That said, you've got someone like Samoa Joe sat at the commentary desk because he's not 100% either, and he could fill that role as well. Raw needs faces to help develop people towards that top guy. They need faces who can lose to heels to make those heels top heels. And I think we're seeing that in how they're working with R-Truth to build Bobby Lashley, when if they were working with someone like Kevin Owens, I think Lashley would feel a bit more dangerous right now.
Now, there was a lot made on social media when the ratings came out this week, as seems to be all is a week-to-week basis. Everybody always wants to make a big deal about the ratings, but in hours 1 and 2 on Raw this week, they maintained about a 1.8 million households or million viewers, and then in hour 3 they averaged 1.6. And a lot of people were making the connection that drop-off between hours 2 and 3 was due to Kevin Owens. He was kind of the lead-in from hour 2 into hour 3. If he's being looked at as the guy to really take that number 2 face spot on Raw, do you think that the company as a whole will look at numbers like that and think, maybe we misjudged this guy. Maybe he's not the guy to really take that, number 2 spot if he's a guy that when he comes on the screen, we're going to lose 200,000 viewers?
WWE are testing a few things right now. I asked this question of fans on my Twitter feed to see what they felt, and certainly they were positive towards Kevin Owens. And I was as well. You have to consider, obviously, the last hour, it's obviously quite late, but in addition, it's an average of the hour. So people could have turned off halfway through the hour, and it still looks bad on Kevin Owens because he was that lead-in to try and hook viewers and keep them. The company thinks that it was Kevin Owens who was in any way to blame here. They're not blaming people because of everything going on at the moment. They're expecting record low ratings. But if they're looking at key negatives, one thing that's been mentioned to me was that a lot of people unfortunately turned off when it was the axe throwing contest, even though I personally thought that was all right.
Let's move over to the Blue brand and talk about SmackDown. This past Friday, they started the Intercontinental Championship Tournament. We talked on last week's show about Sami Zayn being stripped of the title and everything that went into that decision. So they started the 8-man tournament to crown a new champion this week. We saw Daniel Bryan and Elias both advance in the tournament. When you look at the brackets, the way I got it shaken out, if I had to bet, I've got Sheamus beating Elias in the finals of the tournament to become the Intercontinental Champion. I talked a little bit on the show last week as well about my reasons about why I think Sheamus will probably be getting the Intercontinental Championship at the end of all this. Who you got? If you had to fill out a bracket, how you think this one ends up?
I think Sheamus is definitely a strong candidate, but personally for me, I have the final being Nakamura beating Daniel Bryan and then that feud continuing. But really, when you look at how they build tournaments, even as far back as like the Deadly Game in '98 was my personal favourite, but the WWE have very good pedigree with tournaments. It shows how strong a field we've got, that the two of us have both gone in completely different directions. And there's two people we haven't mentioned who, of course, could be in the final, and it would also be an absolutely amazing match, and that's Jeff Hardy and AJ Styles.
Yeah, a lot of interesting matches in that tournament if you're kind of dream booking everything going on. Really, all 4 matches were all current feuds, which I thought was surprising that they really took standing feuds as they are and made those all first-round matchups. We're going to talk a little bit about AJ Styles here in a second, but I do want to mention, I think with his match with Daniel Bryan this past Friday, and everybody's probably seen the news that Drew Gulak was released by the WWE. Released / didn't renew his contract is the word that we're getting. But so essentially his last match with the WWE was aired this past Friday against Daniel Bryan in that IC title tournament. You want to give us just kind of the rundown and about this release and maybe what we might see Drew Gulak do in the future?
Yep, absolutely. And I will say, first and foremost, as is the case with the original report that came out from this, information is constantly updated. And none of the information here has come directly from Drew Gulak. So you will see that the person who originally reported it updated their report further on with more information, which is why it looked like he was released. And then it was found out that he came to the end of his contract. Information is constantly updated like that. So the information that I have and the reports that I've made. So Drew Gulak was originally in 205 Live, but he wasn't used much, and when he was, it was as Enzo Amore's sidekick. He wasn't happy there, so he's moved to NXT, and he earned rave reviews, particularly for his match against Matt Riddle, which was very impressive, I've got to say. That earned him a return to 205 Live as the Cruiserweight Champion, which I felt was a good run, even though it was short. It's around that time they started to talk about contracts, but the two parties couldn't agree during negotiations. The plan, as far as WWE were concerned at that point, was to move him to SmackDown in October and have him go out on his back as is tradition. So just after he was moved to SmackDown, we saw a lot of him coming out, talking about PowerPoint presentations, getting beat up by Braun Strowman, as an example. That would have been the plan until now, when his contract expired, if he did not sign a new one. Instead, Daniel Bryan got involved. We talked a bit earlier about him booking more of his own storylines. He pitched a good one. The WWE went along with it with a hope that it might change Gulak's mind. It did not. However, the WWE still have a high opinion of Drew Gulak and plan to keep pitching contracts to him, but won't bring him back right after releasing so many people, so there'll be a delay at least. They don't want to be offering him a raise when they've just released people to save money. That said, and this is something that's probably going to come up a lot more in future, they're very happy that news of his contract ending wasn't leaked until after it happened to anyone, as is the case with almost everyone else. Almost everyone, when the contract is coming to an end, will leak that information to someone in media because that gives them a greater leveraging position, because then you start to get stories about AEW being interested or New Japan being interested, and it drives up their price. Drew Gulak did not do that, so there is still a lot of respect for him, and they do still hope to reach a deal with him.
Now, we mentioned that, a final match in this IC tournament, AJ Styles versus Jeff Hardy. What a great match that would be for a finals. But my thought is, what is AJ Styles even doing in this tournament? For one, he's a Raw guy, and I know that we've got the wild card rule / brand invitation, going on. So, okay, it makes a way for him to get to SmackDown, but he had the Boneyard match with Undertaker. They brought him back for the Money in the Bank match, which seemed like they were putting him right back in the main event slot, a prime spot. And then he shows up in the bracket for the IC title tournament. What's the reasoning behind AJ Styles? I'm a fan of the IC title. I don't want to go as far as to say that the Intercontinental Championship is below AJ Styles, but at the same time, to me, he does kind of stick out like a sore thumb when you look at that bracket.
I think that's a very good question, and I don't think there are any obvious answers. The IC Championship is obviously one that AJ Styles, to my knowledge, hasn't won yet, and I think it'd be good to add that to his repertoire and really make him the Grand Slam as need be. But there are still a lot of questions to ask. Firstly, if he goes all the way to the final, that's 3 of the 4 appearances that he is permitted by this new wildcard rule. Although we're not allowed to call it a wildcard rule. I don't know if you got the memo, but me and you have been handed a list of banned words that we're not allowed to say on air. Wild card is one of them. Is definitely one of them. We're not allowed to say things like title shot and so on. It's all in the memo. We'll catch you up to speed.
All right.
But if he actually wins this championship, that means he can appear on SmackDown once. So he's not winning this championship, surely, unless the plan is to move him to SmackDown, which was something they were passing around, an idea they were bouncing around in January that I've reported on in my own YouTube. So maybe this is a sort of a backdoor route to that, but I don't personally see it. At the same time, Raw's been struggling for something to do with AJ Styles for a while. If The Undertaker didn't choose to work WrestleMania, it looked like AJ Styles wasn't going to have a match at WrestleMania. And Undertaker, of course, originally was supposed to be having a match at Saudi Arabia, but there wasn't really a plan for WrestleMania at that time. It could, of course, have been Styles versus The Undertaker at Saudi Arabia. Since WrestleMania, Styles has only appeared for 2 weeks on Raw, and for me, in this tournament, I feel SmackDown are actually using him better. But at the same time, for me, Styles always felt more at home on SmackDown.
Be interesting to see what they do with him. Like I said, I don't necessarily think that he's too good for the title, but I'm like you, I don't see him winning it. And so if he's not going to win it, I kind of feel like, again, what's the point of having him in the tournament unless something happens that maybe sticks him over on SmackDown full time. So I guess that's yet to be seen. We'll see how they develop that. Now, we asked for some fan questions again this week. We took a little break from the fan questions because there had been so much news and things to talk about in the past couple weeks, but it's back this week. And we asked you on Twitter if you had questions for Tom that you wanted to ask on the show, that you could use the tag or the hashtag Dropkick DiSKussions and ask your question. And we got a good one from @NoobandCompany1991. Do you want the next Mae Young Classic to have a more heavier focus on women's tag team wrestling or singles competition? And who will be in the next Mae Young Classic?
This is an interesting one because we don't really talk about events like the Mae Young Classic much, especially when, for me, it delivered some really good matches. I sort of fell madly in love with the wrestling style of Rhea Ripley and Dakota Kai because of the first Mae Young Classic. Their match for me was the match of the tournament. So there's a lot that could be unpacked. I think if they want to make it more of an event and not just a tournament, tag team matches may just be the way to go. And there's options to that. The Cruiserweight Classic also involves some tag matches. And you look at the Mixed Match Challenge, which is actually harder to say than I thought it would be. And that had some really good elements. So they could merge some of those together and I think create some very good things. As it comes to individuals who could be in it, there are some very talented people. Unfortunately, most of them are signed to other things. But if I had carte blanche, I'd love to see someone like Rosemary lent from Impact or a Taya Valkyrie maybe.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of names out there that you could still pull. You know, I do think that because of NXT and now AEW that maybe the talent pool as far as names that people would know is getting a little bit smaller, and I include myself in that group. You know, just as a fan, there were names that have now been signed to other companies that if they put together a Mae Young Classic, I would probably not be as familiar going in with some of those names as maybe I have in the past. But a lot of people would say, you know, that's the whole point of something like a Mae Young Classic.
I would agree that there are so many new stars that have been made from it, even just briefly. Look at the performances of Mia Yim, who made her name in backstage, at least, in events like these. So people will continue to grow and perform, and really there are so many talented women now that you could stick absolute unknowns in a 16-woman tournament and still come out with some real gems.
Last thing to talk about before we wrap up the show, and unfortunately we're going to have to end the show on a bit of a somber note, but I do feel like it's important that we at least mention this, and that's the news story regarding Shad Gaspard. Fans probably recognize him most notably as a member of Crime Time in the WWE. I was first introduced to him as the Beast here in Ohio Valley Wrestling, which is right here local to me here in Louisville, Kentucky, when he first made his debut there. Shad, unfortunately, we got the news today officially, passed away. He was 39 years old. The story is that he went swimming with his 10-year-old son in the ocean. They got caught in a riptide. Lifeguards attempted to rescue them, and reports that we're getting is that he told the lifeguards to rescue his son, to put their focus on him, and Shad was lost out to the water. There was an extensive search for him over the past couple of days, and then his body was found just today, washed up on shore and positively identified as Shad. I'm going to read the statement that the WWE put out on WWE.com, and then Tom, let you kind of just give your thoughts and anything that you want to update us with as far as this story goes. Quote, WWE is saddened to learn that former WWE superstar Shad Gaspard had passed away at the age of 39. Gaspard had gone missing while swimming with his son at Venice Beach in California on May 17th. In his final act, Gaspard instructed lifeguards to save his son's life. Gaspard was best known in the WWE as one half of Crime Time with JTG. The fan-favorite duo memorably joined forces with John Cena during his 2008 rivalry with JBL and competed for the WWE Tag Team titles at SummerSlam 2009. Shad and JTG would later square off in heated fashion after a falling out in 2010. Before entering the squared circle, Gaspard played basketball at Georgia Perimeter College. He was also a former bodyguard for P. Diddy, Britney Spears, and Mike Tyson. Admired by friends and colleagues for his warmth and humor, Gaspard was no stranger to heroic deeds. In 2016, he broke up an armed robbery in Coral Springs, Florida, pinning the suspect to the ground until police arrived. Gaspard was also a multi-talented individual, creating his own graphic novel and acting in several TV shows and films, including Brothers and Think Like a Man 2. WWE extends its condolences to Gaspard's family, friends, and fans.
The only comment I really wanted to add was that the news broke on Monday that he was missing, and by Wednesday we'd received official confirmation that unfortunately his body was found. There were a lot of false reports in the build-up to this, so I just want to advise people, as I tend to have to do quite a lot here, really look at who you're getting your information from. Make sure there are journalists as writers and not just well-practiced clickbaiters, because that just confuses the whole situation when you need clear, helpful information. This was a very tragic situation. I've got to say, I've only ever heard great stories about Shad Gaspard. I've never heard anything even neutral. It's always been overwhelmingly positive. So I've got to wish all possible condolences to his family and say how sorry myself and all the Sportskeeda are for the horrible loss.
Yeah, and I'll add my condolences as well to his friends and family. As a father myself, this hit pretty hard today, just to imagine what those final moments would be like for him, and obviously the love that he obviously had for his son. A very selfless act, and really, he died a hero, putting his son above his own well-being. And so again, our condolences to him and his family. And just like Tom said, everything you see on social media and stuff today has been people talking about what a great person he was, a great guy, a positive influence, always had a smile on his face. And so he's definitely a big loss to the wrestling community. And again, we give our condolences, and our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family and his friends at this time. We want to thank you for listening to the podcast this week. Be sure to like and comment on this week's video and subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to Tom's personal YouTube channel and also follow him on Twitter at Colohue. I'm on Twitter at Korey Gunz, and you can check out Sportskeeda.com for the latest wrestling news and articles. We thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next week on Dropkick DiSKussions.